Hello everyone, I am Bipin Joshi and you are watching this companion video to my article Use Generics in TypeScript. In this video, you will learn how to create a generic class in TypeScript. You will also learn to add constraints to your generic class so that only certain types can be used with the class. And you will finally learn how to create objects of generic types. So here I have created a new ASP.NET Core MVC project. Under www root folder, I have added a TypeScript folder. Inside TypeScript folder, I have added three files, tsconfig.json, which contains the TypeScript configuration. You already know what is the purpose of this file and how to add one to your project. Then I have generics.ts file. This is our main file wherein we will be writing the TypeScript code of this example. And I also have generics.html file which we will use just to trigger our TypeScript code. So let me come here. This is generics.ts file. Now let me add a TypeScript class called employee. The employee class has two properties, employee ID and full name. There is a constructor which accepts values for these two properties, and then there is a method called show details which simply displays the employee ID and full name in an alert box. This is the employee class. Now let's suppose we have another class called data processor. Now this data processor class is supposed to do some processing on the employee object. Now we will not go into details of what kind of processing we want. Here we will simply displaying the JSON value of that employee object, but in real world case it will be some kind of processing. So data processor class has one method called process which accepts an object of employee class and inside it does certain processing. Right? So these are the two classes we created, employee class and data processor class. Now let me add a function to test these two classes. Let me add a function called generics demo. Inside generics demo, we create an employee object by passing certain values. We also create EMP processor object, which is basically that data processor, and we simply call the process method of the data processor object. Now let's call this generic demo method from our HTML page. So I will open generics.html and add this code there. In the body on load, we simply invoke that method, and there is a script reference to the generics.cs file. Right. So let's quickly test whether it works as expected. A simple piece of code, but let's check it before we convert this into generics based code. So as expected, the process method simply displays the JSON representation of that employee object with whatever values we passed. Fine. So our employee object and data processor object work as expected. Now let's assume that we have another class just like employee. Let's assume we have another class called customer. customer class has three properties: customer ID, company name, and contact name. The constructor accepts those three values, and the show detail method again displays these three values in an alert box. Now let's assume that we want to perform the same processing with customer class also. So whatever we did with employee, same thing we want to do with customer class, right? To make that possible, we will convert data processor class to use by using generics. We will change data processor class now. So data processor class now accepts the type T as the parameter. So T will decide whether we pass employee or whether we pass customer. So that is that parameter. Inside the process method, now earlier it was obj, the type was employee, now it is T. So depending on whether we pass customer or employee, this obj will be of that particular type. So here also obviously we'll need to change that code. Let me do that. So now we have one object of employee type, another object of customer type. First, we create a data processor by specifying type to be employee. So this data processor object will work on employee types. That's what we mean here. And then we call the process method of data processor. Then we create a data processor object. This time we pass type to be customer, and then we call the process method of process method of data processor. Now let me run this code. So first time it works for employee object. The first call was with employee object, and the second call was with customer object. So now the data processor class, depending on the type that we pass, it invokes the process method. Now here if you try to pass customer object when your data processor is based on employee, then obviously TypeScript is going to give you an error that you can't use customer here because your data processor is supposed to be accepting employee objects. Here I will change it back. In this example, the process method didn't use any properties or methods of obj. Now what if you want to access such properties or methods? So let's see how that can be done. Now if you see our employee and customer class, both of them have a method show details. So show details method is common to them, and let's assume that we want to call show details from inside the process method. So here let me for the time being comment this out, and here we want to call show details. Now at this point of time TypeScript is going to give you error because TypeScript has no idea what methods the obj has. So let's fix this error now. So what we'll do is we will isolate that method, the common members of both the classes. we can isolate in an interface. We can wrap them in an interface. So here I created an interface called iDataObject, which has a method called showDetails. And showDetails. I will make the employee class and customer class implement that interface. And I will change the data processor to have a constraint. Now we have added constraint on T, so that now T is expected to have implemented the iDataObject interface. So we add that constraint by saying T extends iDataObject. Now when you add this constraint, you can see that the error disappears, because now TypeScript is aware what kind of members T will have. So I added this, and now in our code let's run this. Now it should call the showDetails method. So first time it invokes employees showDetails method, and then it invokes customers showDetails method. So this is what is expected behavior. Sometimes you may want to create object of a generic type in your code. For example, let's say we have a class called data object factory. Inside data object factory, let's say we added a method called create. We added a method called create. The create method specifies is a generic method, and it specifies the type T there, and it returns an object of T. Now you would expect that inside you can simply say to return T. This is how we normally do it. But here TypeScript will give you error. You cannot simply call new on T in such cases. Now let's fix this error. So let me replace this definition with what is required. So here we have a create method with T as a generic type. Now the first parameter of create method points to the constructor of T. So depending on what the type is, for example, if we specify employee there, it will be constructor of the employee class. If we specify customer there, the first parameter will be the constructor of customer class. So the first parameter represents the constructor of the underlying type, if you see our employee and customer classes, the constructor takes certain parameters. So we also need to pass those parameter values for the constructor. So that's the job of this second parameter, constructor argument. So we pass it as the second parameter. And create method returns t, an object, a new object of type t. Inside, we create a new object by calling new on the constructor function, and while calling new we also pass the constructor arguments to the function. This will create a new object of t, and we return that object to the caller. So we need to do this way we can create a new object of t. So this is data object factory. Now let's test this code. So I will remove this code and I will add this. So we created an object of data object factory. We then call factory.create method by specifying employee constructor, by passing the employee constructor and values for the constructor parameter, and we store that into an employee variable. Similarly, we call factory.create by specifying customer constructor and passing values for the for that constructor, and then we call emp.showDetails and cust.showDetails. So if object is really getting created, you should see correct details in the showDetails call. So let me save this code and let me try running it. So here you can see the employee show details is getting called. That means EMP is really an employee object, and customer dot show details. Now just for the sake of checking, let's say this underlying object, that is EMP, let me change this type to customer. So at that point of time it is going to give you error, because here we passed employee, whereas this type is so create is going to return an employee, whereas here this type is customer. So this you can't assign employee to customer. So this is how you can create new objects using generic code. That's it for now. If you found this video useful, consider subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching.